Gosh, I'm just making so many videos today. Okay, next order of business to be taken care of is I want to have a next installment of Existentialism. By the way, I'm going to have some further series of phenomenology in serial, as I'm going to discuss parts of his book part by part. His book, Phenomenology of Internal Time Consciousness. But today I want to discuss Søren Kierkegaard, and he was the very first existentialist, even though he wasn't the third one yet. He wasn't concerned an existentialist, but he was. He has a lot of books where he has his existentialist philosophy, including Sickness Unto Death, Fear and Trembling, Either Or. So there's a couple other ones too. But what I'm reading his book, Sickness Unto Death, or I think it's called Sickness Unto Death. Yeah, Sickness Unto Death, and it brings into discussion the topic of despair, and it discusses the notion of the self, and in despair overall to existentialism. Well, existentialism, to define it again, is the questioning of one's existence, the trying to grasp one's existence, bringing into discussion further questions about existence. Now, I'm gonna just read to you Kierkegaard's conception of the self. It's rather difficult to understand, but hopefully I'll assist in the process. Okay, a human being is spirit, but what is spirit? Spirit is the self, but what is the self? The self is a relation that relates itself to itself, or is the relations relating itself to itself in the relation. The self is not the relation, but the relations relating itself to itself. A human being is a synthesis of the infinite and the finite, of the temporal and the eternal, the freedom and necessity, and in short, a synthesis. A synthesis is a relation between two. Considered in this way, a human being is still not a self. Okay. If the relation that relates itself to itself has been established by another, then the relation is indeed the third, but this relation, the third, is yet again a relation and relates itself to that which established the entire relation. Okay, the self is the relation of itself to itself. So it's like a circular relation, because it's a relation. The self is a relation. It's not a whole human being. The self is a relation of itself to itself. So it's difficult to understand. Yes, it is. But if you think about it, it's a very good idea. But then this is understood better when you think about a misrelation of the self. I'll find that definition here too. If I can find it. Despair is the misrelation in the relation of a synthesis that relates itself to itself, but the synthesis is not the misrelation. It is merely the possibility, or in the synthesis lies the possibility of the misrelation. Okay. So, despair. Despair is a misrelation of the relation of itself to itself in the self. A misrelation. The self is healthy when it is established by itself. A human, when a human is born, it will establish the self by creating a relation of itself to itself. Now, despair is when the self is related to something other than is relation to something else other than itself. It's not a circular relation. Now, this is a misrelation, such as, like, this is, an example of this would be like if someone thinks they are something, someone else, or someone desperately wants to be someone else. If I want to be Johnny Depp, then I will attempt so hard to be Johnny Depp, and I will want to dispose of my own self and create the self of Johnny Depp. Now, this is a misrelation because the self is not healthy in this misrelation. Now, despair existentially is not necessarily the person being in despair. The person will always know they're in despair because they will be trying to be someone else, and they will be trying to get rid of the self that they have now. They'll be trying to get rid of it, and they won't know that they'll be in despair. This is what despair is, because it ultimately ends. It ultimately is a sickness unto death. But this death is not really death, though, because this death is... Kierkegaard is a Christian, first of all, and he thinks that there's a God, and that if you sin, you go to, and that if you sin, you don't do, and if you don't get yourself saved, then you will go to hell. Again, I'm not trying to push my religion on you, so don't get all theologically, religiously screwed up and freaked out. It's okay. I'm just talking about existentialism and Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard thinks that the sickness unto death of despair is not really death, because you go to a place where there's ultimately more despair, because you have eternal death, because it's so hard, because you're still trying to get rid of yourself, and this is a eternal death, because it's eternal. It's eternally painful, because you're trying to get rid of yourself, and this is totally unhealthy. Now, despair, existentially, is the collapse of one of the pillars of the self. Now, when you have a misrelation in the self, this is when you're trying to get rid of yourself and you're trying to become another self. That is one of the pillars of yourself collapsing. Now, and that becomes a whole question of your own existence. This is why Kierkegaard's Sickness Unto Death is existential. This is why he was the first existentialist. This is one of them. He has the fear and trembling, and he has the either or in the postscript to whatever, I don't know. But I just wanted to discuss this existentially, because despair is something that calls into question one's existence. So I wanted to discuss this, and also just relate this to existentialism. Now, I'll be discussing this more. Now, a question for you guys: how do you think? Just think of someone trying to be Johnny Depp. Can that person be ultimately happy? Is that person screwed up? Is a misrelation like that? Do you think that would really be hard on a person? I think it would. If you have a misrelation of yourself, there's a misrelation in the creation of yourself, then that's a collapse of some of the pillars of yourself, of your own self, and that's going to cause a lot of problems. So, anyway, I'll be coming back to this, and Kierkegaard's conception of despair. I'll be coming back to this a lot more. So this is just the first one. So I'll see you later.